Alright, so even though I felt like I was officially ending the whole remake thing, at least for this month, with the King Kong video, I thought I would go ahead and do this one also, but do it in kind of this way where we're killing two birds with one stone. I think the last time I did this was with the Grudge and the Ring, and their foreign versions versus their Americanized versions. And I'm not really remembering exactly how I did that, but I'm on pretty much no sleep right now, so this is just going to kind of be whatever it ends up being, and hopefully you'll run with it. If anything, it'll fit the theme of the chaos that's happening in these movies, and we're just going to kind of see what happens and talk about them. So, and kind of, I guess maybe put some focus on each pair individually, and then kind of jump around and see how maybe the originals compare to each other, and then how the remakes compare to each other, whatever's gonna come up. So I guess if we were to start by looking at Cheaper by the Dozen, which, going back to the original being based on this book, which of course this version has the Steve Martin cover, but is the original book inside, that was by two of the Gilbreth children who were portrayed in this movie from 1950, with Clifton, Webb, and Myrna playing the parents, Frank and Lily. And what's really interesting about the way this one starts, both the movie and the book, is how it's more so a love letter to the father than anything else. Where it's the story of the family for sure, but then ultimately the story of the father, and we kind of learn the tragic reason that might be, kind of at the very last second, at the very end. But the idea of his portrayal here, where we see him as this really, it could be really, like when you look at the father in Yours, Mine, and Ours, either one, you get the sense that he's this sort of, by the way, also a real family to my understanding. But when you look at here, there's almost like a cartoonish way in which he was kind of in control, and he was kind of bringing his, military ways into the family, which has happened for better or worse in a ton of families. But here, there is something that's still, like, wholesome about it, but also, and the fact that the kids do sort of fall in line without feeling like they're sort of not as overwhelmed by it as, say, the other group of kids coming into it would be. But here, when you look at Frank Gilbreth specifically, there is a sort of sternness here in a similar way of sort of keeping everything in line, kind of bringing it in his whole efficiency expert thing to the way he raised them. But there was always, like, a loving nature to him also, where it's like he would always take things very seriously, but he was also, like, willing to joke around. There's the great moment where he uses the horn to scare one of the kids, and then later on the kid manages to bring that joke back around to him, in this point to where this kid is basically about to be punished to the fullest extent, it seems, until it occurs to him, oh yeah, it was kind of like kind of the other side of this joke, like the other punchline to this joke that I started. And so to kind of see that, where it's like you can see where the strict nature is, but then the fact that he was always able to sort of come around, and see that other side of things. There was like such a perfect balance here between them, and that also includes like his own comebacks to when they would be. Like, it's interesting how straight from the book a lot of this is, but obviously the narration, of course, but as the events play out also, where like they'll get approached by somebody and they'll make a comment about how many people there are, how many kids there are, and they make like an arc joke, and he says the whole, yeah, we have all the animals, we just need a jackass, so, come with us. And stuff like that, and the fact that it's really specified, especially in the book, that he really was just that quick-witted when it came to that. And sometimes he'd have stuff like in the chamber, and like was always prepared for not just all the events in their lives, but the sort of outside factors coming in also. Even if it's just sort of a throwaway thing like that, there was still just like this constant sort of prepared thing. And the fact that whether you look at that or other scenarios like the school, the way he was always able to like win people over, like when they go to the school, and then it's like it seems like he's putting a big task on these people, and then by the end of this scene, he's like showing the teacher how to bathe, and it's which sounds weird when you don't know the context or what's going on. And then like just the comedic timing of when everybody else comes in to witness this, and it's like just everything about you really get the sense of how loving of a portrait this is of this particular person, and coming from like his actual family. There's just something here that you can really... this is one of those cases where it's like, when somebody's telling their personal story, sometimes you can just kind of dismiss it and be like, oh yeah, it's their personal story. I get like why it would be personal to them. Not that I care, but it would be personal to them. But this really does feel like somebody whose story not only should have been told, but made a perfect book and movie. And as we've seen, it's a scenario that has really come forward, like even regarding other real families coming into it. But here, when we talk about the specific remake from 2003 with Steve Martin, where it does become much more of a... It's a very modernized family. It's a very 2003 family movie, where I think the only reference is at a quick glimpse of Bonnie Hunt's book. We see that Gilbreth was her maiden name, and I think that's pretty much the only connection apart from the 12 children, obviously. Though I can't remember if there were already 12. I want to say the baby was technically the 12th one in the original movie, and that's what the whole setup was. But, yeah, so when you look at this, you are going to see a lot of similarities about modernizing a concept like this. And so you'll see it here, and you also see it in the remake of Yours, Mine, and Ours. But, I mean, by the time we get to the remake of Yours, Mine, and Ours, the well is really, really running dry. And this Cheer by the Dozen already happened, and the sequel to this Cheer by the Dozen was coming out the same year that Yours, Mine, and Ours was out. So you can really get the sense that everything was running out. So there will be things that I talk about in the remake of Cheer by the Dozen that sound like really bad criticisms when you look at the way Yours, Mine, and Ours did the same thing. But it's kind of amazing what, just a general likability, like how far that'll go. Because when you look at these, because yeah, there is definitely a certain amount of chaos in both of the original movies, but when you look at their remakes, obviously chaos in the 50s and 60s was a little different than mid-2000s chaos, and when you were making a family-themed movie. So you've got, like, the completely superfluous inclusion of unconventional pets with, like, a frog and a pig. And as you can see with the pig on both the front and the back here, they're basically just here for the sake of the marketing, to put them in the ads, to put them on the poster, and just to make it look more kid-friendly or something, I don't know, to show you how low the humor is going to go. And yeah, though there is definitely a likability that keeps the remake of Two Brother Dozen afloat, it is the kind of movie where all it takes, we only get as far as the first breakfast scene before everybody's covered in food. And there's an unconventional animal running around causing a bunch of chaos. Like I said, in this case, it's a frog. And like I said, when you look at the remake of Yours, Mine, and Ours, it's the same kind of disaster where it's just completely full of slapstick. And like thinking about the slapstick nature of it, and comparing it to the humor of the other movies, let's take a look for a second at the original Yours, Mine, and Ours that has Henry Fonda and Lucille Ball, who really, I don't know who else could have filled these roles so perfectly, because you've got just integrity in human form in Henry Fonda, and then you've got Lucille Ball coming from her sitcom roots, and just her general type of comedy and style of comedy coming through here in this really big way. But the thing is like when you're thinking like, you know, sitcom humor, there is definitely, when we're looking at the era that we're looking at, there's definitely something a lot more clever going on than you'll find in, like, you know, the remakes. Where it's like when we have this whole setup where they've gone out to dinner and they both have a very similar problem, where both of them don't know how many kids the other has, and they both think they're going to be the odd one out when it's revealed. But the thing here is that the coming together of this and the fact that they're both holding back the same thing, not realizing how much they're going to eventually have in common, and how that's played up and like how much it builds up to that, and adding things in the middle of it, like her eyelash falling into the drink, or her practicing telling him out loud, and there's the confused guy next to her that's overhearing this, and the way they build this up, and the way that like they both think this is gonna be their last date, and so they treat it as such, and in the way they dance around it, there's something so like classic, clever comedy about that. Like I said, it's just like when you look, they don't even try that in the remake. That's like how that's how clever it is. Is the remake just doesn't even want to try apparently. So they just come out and they just say like, oh yeah, by the way, there's this. Though the difference with the remake of Yours, Mine, and Ours is that they did already. This is another case. We just talked about the Parent Trap. This is another case where Dennis Quaid is playing a dad, a single dad who is, you know, still pining for the one that got away. He doesn't quite realize it until the situation's put in front of him. But he wants to get back to the one that got away, which is Rene Russo here. A very, like, Rene Russo's great and everything, but there's definitely a miscasting problem here. Like I said, when you come back to Lucille Ball's roots and her, you know, comedy in general and her style and how much this fits and how it's like she's a contrast to Fonda for sure, but they also feel like they couldn't be more perfect for each other because of that. And Rene Russo's here doing like a hippie sort of thing, I guess, which would, you know, contrast with Quaid's very, you know, straight-laced thing for a little bit, but it's just kind of one note, and it doesn't really have any sort of payoff of sorts. It's just kind of the character type. You'll notice that a lot in both remakes. Even if one is good and one is shit, they both kind of have the same problem where a lot of the time they're dealing with character types rather than actual characters, and it's like, when you look at the original movies, there's a lot of kids that kind of get lost in the mix. Like, I feel like the original Two Brother Dozen has a lot more moments of the kids, like, getting their individual moments. But there's a lot of, you know, characters that do stand out, like, you know, Tim Matheson being one of the oldest kids and how that clashes, and how you have, like, the older girls have, like, their boyfriends and stuff like that, and the dating subplots and all that. But even so, I feel like that's honestly better, and it feels more real than when you get to these others, especially the Yours, Mine, and Ours remake, where it's like the kids aren't real kids. They all just kind of have a gimmick, where it's like, this is the kid that does this thing and this is the kid that does that thing, and there's no like in Yours, Mine, and Ours, the remake kind of sticks to that, and like says, here's all of our one joke characters. The Two Brother Dozen remake actually starts that way, but then there's kind of stuff here, and that's another case where you do kind of, even if the kids don't maybe feel as real as the kids from the original movies, they feel like they each have like some sort of individual or memorable moment at some point, even if it's like fleeting, it's still something. Not like they're not gonna all have the screen time of like Tom Welling or Mark or anything like that, but there's something there as it goes on. Like even the side characters, like Alan Ruck and his family come over, and Beans from Even Stevens is their son, and there's a whole thing going on there where like they look like this very sort of stereotypical, you know, uptight rich family. They've got, the son has like the sweater wrapped around him and stuff like that. But then it is funny how they like immediately corrupt the son, essentially. Dylan, I think his name was. And it's like that's something that would kind of be like an arc in another sense, but it's like this kind of gets straight to the point, and the fact that he's in the house for like 30 seconds and he's already on the chandelier is very funny. And the fact that the parents also, like, the mother is almost like an antagonist of sorts, like a very brief one, and Alan Ruck kind of has this arc that's going throughout the movie where he looks like the uptight dad at first, but then there's the second scene he has where the party's so elaborate and he's like, you know, what happened to Pin the Tail on the donkey, and then his next scene after that is him saying, like standing up to the wife and saying, hey, we'll help you look for Mark. And it's like the fact that he has a whole arc in 3 scenes, and we see it in those 3 steps, actually feels like enough. Like, it's weird how much they establish by just having him say, what happened to Pintail on the donkey? I think that's his only line in that scene. And sure enough, it actually serves its purpose. So I do like when they're able to do stuff like that. Because there's also the whole arc, the Ashton Kutcher arc in this one as well. And we've got the dating thing going through all of this. And it's... what's interesting is I feel like, as far as the dating goes, the original Yours, Mine, and Ours is the only one that treats it pretty dramatically. Where it's the whole, like, everything is coming to a head in this scene, where the daughter is apparently not going far enough, or however they could put that in 1968. And the whole thing, how she's, like, gone through this seemingly traumatizing experience. We didn't really see it play out, but we can probably imagine. And, yeah, everything else is pretty much played comedically. I love the way it's done in the original Cheap by the Dozen, where it's like, it's going to be this whole thing where we see how overbearing he is, like, when they're at the beach, and he's like, you know, because it's 1950, he's saying stuff like, you know, I don't want anybody ogling at your knees and stuff like that, and the women, like, going to the beach, they're wearing what looks like funeral attire, and it's like, it feels almost so much like parody or satire of that you kind of forget that, like, oh yeah, this movie was made in 1950, and it's set even before that, so that's just, like, real, like, that's just them actually talking the way that they would, and then going into this whole thing where he's going to chaperone her on her date, to this big dance, or prom, or whatever it is. And I love this dude that pulls up, and he runs to the house, and the first thing he says is, hey, is your pop ready? As if Frank is his date. And the fact that this, like, it builds up that this is some huge conflict and some whole embarrassing thing for her, and yet this guy seems so psyched about it. Like, this guy is perfectly game for this scenario. And I love Lily's response to that also when he pulls in and she says, he's cute in a vest pocket kind of way. And it's like the dialogue like that throughout this, where it's like there might be a lot of aspects of the movie that feel kind of dated, but there's also, like, ways that the dated aspects can be kind of charming also. They could be maybe a tad disturbing in some instances, but in cases like, you know, just dialogue here and there or something, or just, you know, kind of seeing the way problems progressed into what they are now, like how in family dynamic and even husband and wife dynamic and how they changed, looking at, you know, like something from 2003, or even, you know, 18 years later in 68, there's even, like, a little bit of difference here. But, and as far as the dating goes in the remake, it just doesn't matter. It's, oh, this character likes this person, but then he's also going to go after this person, but they're also, you know, stepsisters, they're really, really embracing just being sisters, and he gets something dumped on his head or something. I don't know. There's so many liquids that people either end up in or get dumped on them in the Yours, Mine, and Ours remake. I feel like that's half the movie at least. So that's how that goes. And we talked about, like, the way other cliches are handled, like them being teased a little bit in the original Cheap by the Dozen, and so he just has a throwaway comment that zings them and then he leaves. And it's great. And we see, you know, it's more infighting in the original Yours, Mine, and Ours, as far as I remember, but, yeah, both the remakes decided to approach bullying in very, very similar ways. It already felt really, really cliche in Cheaper by the Dozen, so by the time Yours, Mine, and Ours just comes around, like, remember in Jumanji, the original Jumanji with Robin Williams, when the Stampede kept going by, and every time the Stampede would pass by, there was always that one rhino that was, like, way in the back and, like, trying to catch up. That's the Yours, Mine, and Ours remake with pretty much everything that we're going to talk about. Where it's like, oh yeah, I'm also doing this thing, but I'm also doing it very poorly, and I'm clearly very behind when things have already long since moved on, and here's my shitty version of it. So yeah, when we get the bullying stuff here, there is like the kid freaking out because he lost his latte is kind of funny. You could almost say maybe a bit of a timeless joke, but the bully, the honestly the scene where they confront the bullies in Yours, Mine, and Ours is just so weird because it's clearly so incredibly tacked on. Because Yours, Mine, and Ours, as shitty as it is in a big damn hurry for some reason. It's only like 80 something minutes compared to everything else going on here. Well, no, the original Two Dozen was 80 something minutes also, and they put so much into it, you just don't really realize it, but in a good way. Yeah, so when we get this whole big confrontation, that should be this, sort of climatic moment, we have everybody sort of seems to materialize all in the moment here. And there's a side plot that is so worthless you keep forgetting about it, and I think the script forgot about it also, given how they conclude it right here. The character, I think his name is William, he's one of the older brothers, is like running for class president, and they really, really try to make that a subplot. And like we see them putting posters up a couple of times, and that's pretty much it. They get help from Drake Bell, who's like, hey, put graffiti on everything, and that's literally his answer to everything. And they don't treat that as a running joke, they treat it as a character trait that's like supposed to make him likable or something. I don't know. But, I mean, you want to talk about child endangerment, I mean, Drake Bell got a real good look at it here, but here's the thing, though, is when everything is converging and we're getting the big confronting the bullies scene, it's your normal cliche scene, and then as this plays out, I think it's Daniel Panabaker, one of the sisters, runs up and just says, William, you won class president! And then and then they all, like, celebrate. And it all, like, happens at once, like, the confronting the bullies, and this, and everybody materializing in the same place all at once. And I believe they're at school, by the way, so nobody's just going to school, they're just hanging outside the school. If it was already over or something, I don't remember. I don't know why everybody would have still been hanging around there, but, that's, yeah. So, like, just, as far as, like I was talking about, the idea of being clever, just kind of seems to be so lost. Like, it's a really lost art. Like, when you talk about, like, I guess we can talk about the idea of the parents sort of going to extremes, particularly the fathers. To where it's like, Henry Fonda in Yours, Mine, and Ours feels very sort of normal. His name is Frank. I was confused because I was like, Frank here and Frank. Okay, so they're all Franks. Okay, except for Steve Martin. Okay, so I'll try not to make that confusing. Okay, so Frank Beardsley, the Henry Fonda character here, and Dennis Quaid here, has that nature of being overbearing, but here's the thing, is that, well, like I said, Fonda just really had this way to where none of it ever felt like too much. Like, he felt like stern and like he had his rules, but it never felt like he was being overbearing or like the kids were uncomfortable for any reason. And so that's the point that we get here, but we actually get to that point where we talked about how Rene Russo is kind of supposed to be the free spirit and stuff like that, so of course she's going to clash with Frank at some point, but there's a point in time when the house party happens, where the house gets completely destroyed. There's a whole fucking band there. I do think it's funny that the pizza guy got involved, because we see the pizza guy twice. Once when he's there looking for his money, and then the second time he's like amidst the party and leaving when everybody else is scattering. That's kind of funny. But everything else is just the typical house party cliche bullshit, and this is where they get caught, this is where they get in big trouble. And when you see this as a normal person, you think, oh, Frank is yelling at them, Frank is punishing them, Frank is saying, this is why we need rules. And it's pretty reasonable, right? It's reasonable, especially because you're thinking like, oh wow, I'm really impressed that he hasn't literally murdered them for this. Like, it's like, wow, he's playing it cool by just verbally punishing them and saying, like, you can't do this or whatever. And like I said, we need rules, apparently, because this is what you do when we try to be lenient or whatever. And for some reason, unless I'm misinterpreting the remake of Yours, Mine, and Ours, which I would surely hope to God is not the case, Frank is essentially supposed to look like kind of a bad guy here, and we're supposed to totally be on Rene Russo's side by saying, like, oh, what he does is too much. You know, him wanting to apply rules to these unruly children is apparently too much. And that's, like, the message that they shouldn't go by. I mean, you would think it would be, like, yeah, you know, make sure you have some rules and make sure you have things that will hopefully keep them intact and keep them away from making decisions like having a house party that destroys the house, and potentially endangering the younger kids. No, no, just be a free spirit. Just do whatever you want to do. And that's, I don't know. And your family will come together and you will all love each other or something. I don't know what the fuck the remake of Yours, Mine, and Ours' problem is, but it's weird. It got so drunk on slapstick, like how I said, just I feel like so much of the movie is Dennis Quaid falling into paint, falling into different liquids. He has to kiss a pig at some point. It's just the idea, like, it is constant, like, you know how we were just talking about in the King Kong video about how action movies nowadays that are, like, big and epic have just action scene after action scene after action scene, and all the constant chaos of it makes it so tiring and boring and bland. And it's like, this is the case. This is the case with the remake of Yours, Mine, and Ours, of just having constant slapstick, having constant kids running around and pop music playing during montages of chaos and more chaos. And that's pretty much all it is. Just making messes all the time. That's all the movie is one giant making a mess montage, and then the parents fighting in between. And that's the thing also, is the idea of the parents fighting is, I don't really, and it turns into the whole bickering thing that gets really boring. I don't really remember Henry Fonda and Lucille Ball having a scene like that. Like, the entire the movie's nearly 2 hours, and the entire first half is before they even get together. Like, the entire first half is just her trying to somewhat get accepted by them after we've had the long sequence where they even, you know, they take so much time to confess to each other. Which, like I said, is great, because it actually lets comedy happen. Like, real comedy happen. And then we get to this point where they go to the extreme and they get her drunk. And like really drunk, like, what is it that Henry Fonda calls it? Alcoholic Pearl Harbor. That's what it is. And that's very appropriate. And like I said, and the way it handles something extreme like that and does it in a comedic sense is also something that the original Cheap by the Dozen does really well. Where it's like the idea of filming them while they have their tonsils taken out. Seems like something that's so extreme, but yet it's able to come off funny because, number one, the whole start of the joke is the fact that it comes from his efficiency and his obsession with that. And then there's the whole Martha mix-up. And it's like how they find ways to add more comedic elements to the setup is something that a lesser movie always seems to forget in comedy. And then there's after the Martha mix-up, you have the whole thing where Frank just willingly goes in and he says, you know, like, fuck it, I'll do it. I'll just show you how easy it is. And then when he comes out, he's like anything but okay. And then I love the moment when the final reveal, obviously the final punchline to this is the fact that there was no film in the camera. And it's like it's just joke after joke after joke with this one setup of him wanting to film them while they have their tonsils taken out. And then there's that moment that I love where once it's revealed that there's no film, how he's in this completely dazed state, and he's attempting to, like, pull his sleeves up to fight. And it's just this really funny physical image. And it's like, that's where physical comedy really works. Where you don't have to have him face-planting into paint, or face-planting into shit, or whatever it is. And there's something like that. And then when you have stuff like another common theme throughout at least the original movies is the kids getting sick, and the way both of them handle this stuff. Like if this was a thing in the remakes, they'd just be projectile vomiting everywhere. There's already puking jokes in the Cheaper by the Dozen remake, but here, both of them, the way they handle it, where I love in Cheaper by the Dozen when he says, we're not going to have an epidemic in this house. There's no time for such nonsense. And it's like, that's not only is that just funny in general, but it's especially funny because I feel like that's the way most people feel when they get sick is, wow, I just don't have time for this. Like, there's just way too much to be doing to be sick right now. And the way that he sums that up so eloquently is very funny. And then the way the doctor comes in and makes a joke about the children and says that it messes up the public health statistics of the state of New Jersey whenever one of their kids gets sick, which is very funny. And you look at the whole joke that goes on for a while in the original Yours, Mine, and Ours, where one of the kids gets sick at the wedding, and then there's the whole joke of the doctor coming in. I think I love it. It's probably my favorite joke throughout all four of these movies put together. While this child is sick and they're waiting for the doctor to show up, the power goes out. So they have to have candles. And so when the doctor finally shows up and one of the kids answers the door holding a candle, the doctor's response is, "Oh God, I'm too late." And that is so hysterical, I cannot put it into words. And it's such a simple joke too, but it had so much setup. Like, all of these events had to take place for this one little payoff. And it's so funny. And that's, like I said, something else that a movie like, the remake was never going to find, ever. It was never going to take the time to say, oh, if we just do this thing that's funny in itself and we do this thing that's funny in itself, we can put them together and have this thing that's hilarious that comes out of it. There was never even close to that amount of thought. In something like the Here's One on Ours remake, it always stops at, well, here's a funny thing. But when they say here's a funny thing, they mean by the standards of, like, 5-year-olds, if that. Maybe that's being generous. I don't know. And because there's a lot of nothing side characters also. Like I said, as far as side characters go, we talked about, like Alan Ruck and his family and stuff like that, and the Two by the Dozen remake, and just the people that kind of come and go throughout the original movies that, like, just can have one moment, like the guy that overheard Lucille Ball, like, confessing how many children she has. These people that can just walk in and out of scenes and make an impact. I don't, like, as far as side characters go, we have, like, Jerry O'Connell is here in the Years One and Ours remake as, I don't know. Is he a boyfriend of Rene Russo? Is he a potential boyfriend of Rene Russo? I think the characters even discuss this briefly, and nobody fucking knows who he is or what he's doing here, and I don't think the script does either, and that's why the characters are talking about it. And David Koechner's here as, like, somebody that's kind of, like, we have the matchmaker in the original movie, the one that, like, practically talks to the camera, and the remake, they kind of set that up where he's a matchmaker, but he's a matchmaker in the wrong way. Like, he sends him in the wrong direction. But there's not really much of a payoff to that. And it's like one joke that's dragged out that doesn't, like the payoff is, like, at the very beginning, and then it just keeps going. Like, the worst kind of joke. There's a whole thing going on here about how much help there is. I feel like help is kind of mentioned in passing in the original movie. There's the whole scene in the remake of Two by the Dozen where he has to call in for help. That's kind of a funny montage where Steve Martin just kind of gets to do his thing a little bit. It's almost like kind of like the scene in Mrs. Doubtfire, only maybe not as extreme, but just him sort of playing off the phone without anybody else there is always fun to see. But here we have Linda Hunt. Oscar winner Linda Hunt doing, I don't really know what. Like, it seems very, like, there's a while where it's like she has a scene and a couple of scenes in the movie at the beginning when she's just kind of there, and you're like, what is her purpose here exactly? Apparently she's the help, but it takes a while for them to kind of establish that, especially since you have one person here who is Linda Hunt sized. And maybe that's the joke. I don't know. It doesn't really feel like there's many, like, real punchlines here. It's just kind of a lot of things happening, so it's hard to tell. Like, even if they tried to set up a joke, you kind of can't even tell. Like, if somebody's not face planting into liquid, or falling into water, or whatever the hell, you can't really tell. So, And there are cases where that can actually kind of work. And I feel like there's plenty of slapstick moments in the remake of Cheap by the Dozen where they actually kind of find something that works. Like the whole swing on the chandelier, like the way they corrupted Dylan immediately. And I actually like the moment when he and Tom are hanging out the chandelier, and Tom like stops in mid scream and asks him about restaurants. That's pretty funny. And then obviously when they come crashing down, that's technically a slapstick moment, but the whole thing kind of worked anyway. We have Ashton Kutcher, falling into water, of course. But then there's the follow-up scene where they soak his underwear and meat. And, well, that's, just a typical slapstick moment, a typical prank scene. And, oh my, for the love of God almighty, are there prank scenes galore in the Years, Mine, and Ours remake? It's like, that's where a lot of slapstick comes from. It's like, oh, let's just do pranks. Pranks and making messes, that's what that one is. But here, we have the follow-up moment, which makes it funnier, where they're getting in trouble. And the way he delivers that line in that very Steve Martin way of explaining what happened and saying it's very wrong, it's very funny, but it's very wrong. Because when he says that it was funny, it's completely straight-faced. Which is what Steve Martin does so brilliantly, and is why he is impossible to imitate. Being able to just completely deadpan things. And the way they use that to their advantage. I wouldn't say they utilize Steve Martin to his fullest, and they've certainly got to rein him in a little bit because we're making a kids movie, but there is definitely... He is maybe not used to his fullest extent, but they definitely do know his strengths and try to put them in this character as much as this concept will allow, I suppose, within the confines of, PG and family friendly and stuff like that. Even stuff that just kind of feels like real moments, like when he says the wrong name when he's trying to address people. They set that up like it's the start of Mark's arc of him feeling really left out, but that's definitely a real thing. Like me and my brother are just two people, and our parents did that constantly. Just called us the wrong name. So to actually see that portrayed here is something I'm surprised that you don't really see in any of the other movies. So there's that. And I was talking about how there's just something about, like, the fact that the original Cheap by the Dozen is just an absolute love letter to this dad. Is this whole, makes it really feel like this special thing. And that's not really something that Tom is going to live up to as a character. But, like I was talking about, the movie itself has a likability that goes a long way. And he does have a lot to do with that, and it's just for these little moments, like when one of the girls gets hit with a dart, and she's got a spot here, and he goes to put a Band-Aid on it. He does there's like a split second where he does like mock horror, to kind of scare her and then make her laugh, and it's like just stuff like that that's like a fraction of a second long, makes all the difference. There's the moment where he does like the dorky dad dance or whatever. That might seem like, childish and cringy and stuff like that, but number one, that's clearly what the joke is. But also, like I said, I don't know, there's just something about his dorkiness that actually makes him likable throughout it. And of course, in the same scene when Bonnie Hunt returns the favor, and I think it's supposed to be this comedic moment. All it was really showing me was that Bonnie Hunt could get it. But which I don't know why that was surprising to me, but it kind of is. But I guess because she just kind of seems inherently like, motherly of sorts. I don't know if it's just because I grew up on the Beethoven movies also, but yes. But also talking about her and talking about the relationship between them, because we did talk about how the Quaid and Russo just kind of don't really mesh. But Ball and Fonda was like, when you talk about opposites attract, it's like this is kind of the... There's obviously ways that you should not believe that whatsoever, but then there's cases like this where it does make absolutely perfect sense, and how they just kind of fit together like puzzle pieces. And here, like I said, when we're talking about 1950, it does seem like there can be some dated aspects to the relationship between them, but I don't know, and I feel like I've heard criticisms about, like the way Frank and Lily get along does feel very dated and very 1950s. But it does also feel like there's like, there's the moments we see them by themselves, like when the baby's born and stuff like that, and it does feel like that they are, you know, like teammates in this whole endeavor. And there's, like, I believe the words they use in the actual movie are a partner in every enterprise, which actually does make sense. And like when they have the meeting about the job assignments and stuff like that, it definitely feels like they are co-parents for sure. Like he has, like, you know, the head of the household kind of thing going on, but I feel like it's clear at the end of the day it's very much this sort of joint effort, and it's almost like a facade, that he's like the whole center of it, and it really is the two of them together. And like I said, especially watching Webb and Lloyd kind of play off each other, you kind of get that vibe that there's something very I don't know, sort of coexisting going on about all this. But the thing going on with Bonnie Hunt here is that we do have them going their separate ways for a lot of the movie. That's like what a big plot point of the movie is. But when they are separate and you can kind of see them have their own individual moments, in this weird way you can actually see how they sort of fit together. Where it's like, where she might be sort of the more strict one and he might be a bit more of the fun-loving one, but there's so many of both qualities in both of them that you don't really get the sense. Like, it feels more real, where you don't get the sense that one is just this thing and one is just that thing. And it's like, it's only when these, like, their strengths and weaknesses are highlighted when they're apart is the thing. But as far as these individual moments, you do get, like, how they both do have their strengths and they have their weaknesses. As far as Hunt goes, I love the moment when Piper Perabo and Ashton Kutcher just start making out in front of them. And there's the moment where she tries to break it up, and then she just kind of snaps for just a very split second and, like, claps and tells them and, like, yells at them to stop. And it's just such this brief moment that it seems like the other characters realize that the point has been they've gotten the point across, but it's not like a stopping moment, like, whoa, where did that come from? It's because it's just so fleeting, but it makes the point. And how she has, like, this sort of passive-aggressive nature to her that just really, really works in this very comedic sense. When she says, like, say the rosary under her breath when they're saying, like, you know, help me out. When she's saying help me out to Piper Perabo. And stuff, and then we get, you know, these little tender moments, like when she's talking about, when she's at the hotel and she orders 12 pillows. At the same time, there is this continuous thing where the movie does seem to lose track of how many kids there actually are in the house that they're caring for, and I don't know if that's a character thing or a script thing. Because it's like, you know, why does she need 12 pillows? Because we know, like, Tom Welling and Piper Perabo and Hilary Duff aren't hanging out in the bed with them. And then there's the moment where he's calling for help, and, like, it occurs to him halfway through the scene, oh yeah, I should probably tell you, I keep telling you I have 12 kids, but, like, 3 of them are basically adults, and 1 of them doesn't even live here. But yeah, I don't know how old Tom Welling and Hilary Duff were when this was made, but I mean, and I've noticed this because I'm aware, I'm more familiar with them being adults now. But I feel like they're old enough here that a lot of this is unnecessary, but you know, that's the movie, I guess. What is really interesting about, I guess another thing I wanted to mention about like the slapstick and stuff like that is the way the remake of 2000 handles it is when sometimes it decides to go really over the top. What I really appreciate is the fact that when they do go over the top, it is very funny, because, like, I don't know that you can even establish over the top in the remake of Yours, Mine, and Ours, because it's just, the whole thing is just whatever. But the moment that feels like it should stick out, especially in the She Rather Doesn't remake, is when Steve Martin's hiding in the closet and a hatchet comes through it. And it's like, that's the moment where you feel like, oh, they've really gone over the top. And it's like, okay, that's a little too extreme of a joke. But the fact that it's that extreme makes it as funny as it is why it actually works. So it's like, you know, I bash this movie, but it's like, there is a way to do this kind of thing, and for it to still be funny, and for it to still work. And so, every now and then they find it in this one, but like I said, the original movies don't feel a necessity to go over the top, because they just kind of are their, like I said, they seem to be mostly focused on feeling real, like real families with real children getting into real situations. And these the remakes are kind of amplified versions of it, but it's the remake that you rather doesn't, that does manage to find these real moments, like actual like emotional moments that don't feel, you know, like Hallmark movie or too sappy or whatever. Like the fact that they build up the issue of Mark feeling like an outcast for the whole movie, and it kind of being this whole plot. Like it's played up real enough, and that kid's performance is real enough that it does feel like if this were real life, that Mark's story would probably be darker than the way it plays out here. But speaking of darker, there is a moment in the original Two by the Dozen that is hard-hitting in the way that we don't get in any of the other movies. And that is the fact that Frank ultimately dies unexpectedly. And it almost seems like it should be out of place if it weren't for the fact that it's clearly a real family. But like the fact that the movie does have all these happy beats, to the point that when they build up, like, this is a love letter to our father, this is a loving portrait of our father, this is a story about our father, and then it's, you know, this great loving moment after great loving moment, and funny moment after funny moment, and even when he's going to his extreme, like chaperoning her to the dance or whatever, they still come around. It's still this big triumphant happy moment, and family always comes together. It really seems like it should be obvious what this is leading to. Yet somehow it is a massive gut punch that feels like it's from out of nowhere, which makes perfect sense, because it feels like just as it would with the family itself, where it feels like it's from out of nowhere, and you realize the grieving that's going on. That moment of Lily sitting at the table alone is just heart-shattering, and like I said, the fact that it just comes from out of nowhere, much like the family experienced it, makes it all the more powerful. And it's like, I don't want to ruin anything, but sometimes it gets me to thinking, like, wouldn't that have been crazy? Wouldn't that have been insane if the Steve Martin movie played out exactly the way that it plays out? And I love the moment on the football field. I love when they hold up the signs that say, "We love the coach." That is so heartwarming and lovely, and it's this great sort of finish to this movie. This great wholesome finish. But I mean, how crazy would it have been if they made the remake of You Rather Than exactly like it was, and then Tom just abruptly died of a heart attack? Am I sick? Am I, like, what? Am I going too far? I don't know. Sometimes I ponder just how crazy that would have been, especially, like, you know, seeing a 2003 audience react to that so suddenly, would have kind of been amazing. And it would have been, like, you know, like he's another one, like they kind of treat Quaid in the remake of Yours, Mine, and Ours, where the dad kind of seems to get the shit end of the stick a little bit for doing what he can, because yeah, I kind of get where Welling's coming from about how he was making choices for himself, and he was worried about Richard Jenkins and showing him up and stuff like that. But it's interesting to me when you talk about how I talked about how in the original movies the kids felt like real kids, and it's like when Tom gets rather famous, takes this big job, and gets on TV and has to talk to the press and stuff like that, I feel like there would at least be a honeymoon period of this where everybody would be super psyched about it, and all the kids would be super psyched. It's like, holy shit, our dad is on TV. Holy shit, our dad's kind of famous. Holy shit, our dad's making a shitload of money. And they just like hate it all the time. like from the very start, it doesn't once faze them. Like at one point, one of the kids says like, "Oh yeah, it's kind of cool that Dad's on TV," but it's like there's not even a moment at the beginning. Like even if it's just one time, even if it's just the first time, you would think at some point they'd be like, "Well, wow, this is actually kind of awesome. This is new." No, and the same thing with Bonnie Hunt and her book also. They get famous so easily. Nowadays, they have a really shitty reality show about the fact that they have 12 kids, but
yeah, I guess a coaching job in a book will do for now. But I guess the book is still kind of like self-exploitation or something. Whatever you would see now on like reality TV or whatever. But yeah, so yeah, but they obviously they are, you know, super upset about the move, and that's the thing that kind of sets the mood of the kids throughout it. Like I do like the moment when they're during the move where they're playing taps. Is pretty funny, but yeah, and just not near as jovial as the original movie, which, like I said, is more true to life because it just literally like obviously the book is directly true to life, coming from the actual perspective, and then most of this movie is just the book on screen, and so adding that real element to it adds a certain factor to it. But like I said, that's missing a lot when you look at both remakes, even if one is particularly better than the other. But I was trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to mention about the original Years Behind Ours. I feel like it's kind of gotten not as mentioned here, especially for how good it is. I do like that. You would think like it maybe be a bit much that one particular kid stands out when there's 18 to deal with. But I do love the comedic timing of the Philip character, especially. Where I believe he's the one that's caused for Lucille Ball to have the argument with the nun, which was like a great scene for her. And then there is the moment where it's Christmas and his bike falls apart after they said, "Oh, this bike has your name on it," and just the way the kid, like, so resigned, just says, like, you know, "Yeah, they have my name on it, all right." And it's and so like that's a moment kind of like Mark in the Cheer Brother Dozen remake, where sometimes I feel like it's fine to have like a lot of particular focus on one kid despite all the other ones going on, because it does feel like it gives it a sort of through line as it goes on. Because for the most part, I would say the original Cheer by the Dozen probably feels like the original Yours, Mine, and Ours feels like the most episodic of them. Even though they're both kind of episodic, but the original movies especially have an episodic feel to them. But I think that's another thing that like adds to the real factor of it, because like feeling episodic is just essentially life, and that's basically what these two movies feel like. It's just sort of the life of these people. It doesn't like need plots coming in like, hey, let's show up Richard Jenkins and take this coaching job and how that affects everything, and Rip Torn doing the same thing here, and then the bickering and the stuff like that, and the bickering comes into this as well. The marriages in the original movies seem so stable, so perfectly stable. It's like you talk about the dynamics in the 50s and 60s between men and women, but I mean, I said these seem like pretty stable marriages in comparison to all the fighting going on in the others. And then I guess with Yours, Mine, and Ours, I guess you can't bring up without bringing up the Brady Bunch controversy, where it was like, this was like, I think this was the year before the Brady Bunch like aired, and then there was the whole like lawsuits going on and stuff like that. And it's like that shit, and apparently it was just some really bizarre coincidence. Interestingly enough, and yeah, and I feel like the ending of the original Yours, Mine, and Ours is really because while there's certainly not a complete unity at the end of the original Cheer by the Dozen because of tragedy, there is just something that I really love about the ending of the original Yours, Mine, and Ours, where it's because one of the things that's really amazing when you see two parents co-parenting is seeing like the multitasking. This is in movies or real life. Like just watching a really, really busy parent just multitask, it just like it's nothing. And so you get this moment where Lucille Ball is going into labor, and Henry Fonda is just running around the house, and he's just taking somebody back to bed. He's talking to the girl about the guy and the problem that she had. And just all of this is going on at once. There's the bike thing being stuck under the car, and just like the complete effortlessness of him just handling every single thing that's going on. And Lucille Ball also taking part in this while literally going into labor. And it just really shows the beauty, like, what parents, like, you know, go through, and how they are managed to basically become stronger throughout their experiences, and are able to use that for the better of the entire family. And just the way it portrays that is this really beautiful thing. So, yeah. I think I'm running out of gas, so we can go ahead and stop this here. I don't really know what to say as far as like preferences. I would say, if I had to like rank these, like the four of them, from best to worst, I would say the original Cheaper by the Dozen, then the original Yours, Mine, and Ours, then the remake of Cheaper by the Dozen, and then Over There on Another Planet is the remake of Yours, Mine, and Ours. And obviously, if I had to take two of them together, it would be the Cheaper by the Dozen movies for sure, because of all the things I mentioned. Not just because the remake of Yours, Mine, and Ours is a disgrace, but the fact that this one as a remake really did kind of step up and was able to do its own thing and do the own thing that represents its era that it came out also and the humor of that era, without completely tarnishing what was going on. Like, it's still having like its values in here, in the same, while they may not be completely the same, there's still something in there that's holding it together and cohesive, and it's, yeah, but I think that's going to be it for these. So I think the next thing is going to be a couple of reviews of new releases, and then October will be here, and then we'll get to have a lot of fun. So yeah. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.